Pam Bondi walked into the crowded hall with her usual poise. She had attended many public events before, but today felt slightly different. The air was thick with anticipation, and cameras clicked constantly, catching every moment. People were whispering, some smiling, some staring intently, waiting for the moment when she would take the stage. She knew the room was full of reporters, political analysts, and ordinary people curious to see her speak. Despite her experience, a small flutter of nervousness ran through her. She brushed it off quickly. She had faced bigger crowds, tougher questions, and more critical eyes before. This was just another day in the public eye, or so she hoped. As she approached the podium, she noticed a few things that made her pause for a fraction of a second. A large screen behind her displayed her name, making the moment feel even more official. Microphones were set up in front, ready to catch every word. The room seemed larger than usual, the noise louder and the faces more scrutinizing. She adjusted her jacket, straightened her posture, and reminded herself to stay calm. She knew that confidence mattered. The way she carried herself could influence how the audience perceived her, whether she felt nervous or not. When the event began, the host introduced her with praise, listing her accomplishments and her time serving in public office. The audience applauded politely. Bondi smiled and nodded, keeping her focus on the people rather than the cameras. She started her speech smoothly, talking about her experiences and the importance of law and order, ethics, and public service. Her words were clear, direct, and precise. The crowd listened quietly, some nodding in agreement, others taking notes. But just as she was gaining momentum, a question came from the audience that caught her off guard. It was not rude or disrespectful, but it was unexpected and complicated. The question challenged a decision she had made years ago, touching on details she hadn't prepared to discuss publicly today. For a moment, she froze. The cameras seemed to get louder, the room quieter, as if everyone knew that this was the moment where she could falter. A faint blush rose to her cheeks, not because she was afraid, but because she realized that the question had put her in a vulnerable position. Bondi took a deep breath. She had learned over the years that the first reaction often mattered most. A pause, a thoughtful look, a small acknowledgement could make a big difference. She smiled politely and leaned slightly forward to show engagement. "That's an interesting point," she said. Her voice was calm even, but her mind raced. She needed to find the right words to answer honestly without weakening her position. She knew the cameras and the audience were all waiting for her next move. For a few moments, she felt a flicker of embarrassment. It wasn't a crushing feeling, but it was noticeable. She had always prided herself on being prepared, on knowing the details, on staying ahead. And yet here she was, confronted by a question she hadn't fully anticipated. She could feel the heat rising to her face, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted her notes. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension. Some looked curious, others concerned, but none of them knew what was going on in her mind. Even in that brief moment of discomfort, Bondi reminded herself of a critical lesson she had learned in her career. Everyone has moments where they feel caught off guard. How she handled this moment would show more about her than any prepared speech ever could. She focused on her breathing, slowed her pace, and let herself regain control. Her thoughts ran rapidly. She considered acknowledging that the question was challenging, showing humility, but also highlighting her experience and her understanding of the issues. The audience waited. Cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing every blink, every slight change in expression. A few people whispered to each other, wondering how she would respond. For a second, she imagined the headlines that might follow if she stumbled. She shook the thought away. She wasn't there for headlines. She was there to communicate, to explain, and to demonstrate her authority, even if that meant admitting a small vulnerability. She finally spoke, carefully choosing each word. Her tone was measured, professional, but also relatable. She explained the context of her past decisions, outlining the thought process behind them. She admitted that while some aspects could have been handled differently, her choices had been guided by a commitment to fairness and law. Her words were direct yet human. She wasn't hiding behind jargon or political phrasing. Instead, she was connecting with the audience, letting them see that she was a real person who had faced difficult choices. Slowly, the tension in the room began to shift. The audience leaned in, listening more intently. They could sense her sincerity and her knowledge. The embarrassment she had felt moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. Cameras still clicked, but now they captured a different kind of moment. not one of discomfort, but of a person stepping up and taking control. After she finished addressing the question, Bondi paused and let the silence fill the room. It was a moment of quiet reflection, both for her and for the audience. Then she smiled, letting a sense of ease return to her posture. She continued her speech, now with even more energy and clarity. She discussed the importance of accountability, the challenges of public service, and the lessons learned from past experiences. Every word was deliberate, every gesture purposeful. The embarrassment she had experienced earlier had become a stepping stone, a reminder that even leaders are human. Some members of the audience later admitted that they had noticed her initial hesitation, but they were more impressed by how she had recovered. It was a subtle transformation, almost invisible to those not paying close attention, but significant nonetheless. Bondi had turned a potentially awkward moment into an example of resilience and poise. She had shown that authority wasn't about being perfect or never feeling embarrassed. It was about facing challenges with honesty, composure, and confidence. As the event continued, she answered more questions, each one reinforcing her credibility and expertise. Her earlier moment of embarrassment seemed far behind her, replaced by a sense of respect and attention from the audience. She smiled genuinely, engaging with people in a way that felt natural rather than rehearsed. Interviews with reporters after the session praised her calm demeanor and thoughtful responses, noting how she had handled the situation with skill. By the end of the event, Bondi reflected quietly on what had just happened. The brief embarrassment had reminded her of the importance of humility and preparation. It had also reinforced the value of quick thinking and emotional control. These lessons, she realized, were not just for public appearances. They were essential in life, especially in roles of leadership and responsibility. She had shown that even when caught off guard, one could respond with dignity and authority. As she walked out of the hall, she noticed people looking at her differently than when she had arrived. There was a newfound respect, a recognition of her ability to handle challenges gracefully. Bondi smiled to herself, understanding that these moments defined character more than flawless speeches ever could. She had faced embarrassment, confronted it head-on, and emerged stronger. That day, she had not only addressed the audience, but had also reaffirmed her own belief in resilience, composure, and the power of human connection. After the event, Pam Bondi walked down the quiet hallway of the building, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The crowd's energy had faded, leaving her with a moment to reflect on what had just happened. She felt a mix of relief and lingering tension. The unexpected question from earlier still played in her mind, but now it was accompanied by a sense of accomplishment. She had faced the moment and responded, yet she knew that to truly reclaim her authority, she needed to think carefully about her next steps. She found a small, empty conference room and closed the door behind her. It was quiet, giving her the space to breathe and process everything. Her assistant sat across the table, eyes full of curiosity but careful not to interrupt. Bondi poured herself a glass of water and leaned back in her chair. She allowed herself a few moments to just sit, letting the adrenaline of the event slowly fade. It was in these quiet moments that she often gathered her strength, remembering that composure was built not only in public, but in private as well. Pam reflected on the incident with clarity. She had been momentarily unprepared for a question that touched on the more intricate aspects of her past work. It wasn't the type of challenge that could shake her completely, but it was enough to make her pause. She considered how the audience had perceived her, how the cameras had captured her reaction, and how small gestures like a hesitant smile or a subtle adjustment of her papers could speak louder than words. Even minor signs of discomfort could be amplified in the public eye. Her thoughts shifted toward strategy. She knew that handling public embarrassment required a careful balance of humility and authority. She needed to acknowledge the moment without letting it define her. She reviewed how she had responded during the event. Her words had been measured, her tone calm, but she could see areas where she could improve. The way she framed her explanation could be slightly sharper, more focused, and more confident. These were small adjustments, but in public life, small adjustments mattered immensely. Bondi decided she needed to prepare for any potential follow-up. In her career, she had learned that people often remembered the recovery more than the stumble. How she moved forward would leave a lasting impression. She pulled out a notebook and began jotting down points. ways to explain past decisions with clarity, phrases that showed accountability, and examples from her career that could reinforce her expertise. She wasn't preparing a speech, but rather a mental toolkit, a set of strategies she could draw from when confronted by challenging questions in the future. While she worked, her mind wandered briefly to the feelings that had surfaced during the event. The embarrassment she had experienced was fleeting but powerful. It reminded her that even people in positions of authority were human, that no amount of experience could completely shield one from unexpected situations. She acknowledged the feeling without judgment. It was not a sign of weakness, but a signal that she needed to remain alert, composed, and thoughtful. Recognizing emotions in herself helped her control them better in front of others. Her assistant, sensing the intensity of the moment, offered a quiet suggestion. "Would it help to go over some scenarios just in case questions come up again?" Bondi nodded. She knew that practicing responses in a calm setting could make a real difference when under pressure. They spent the next hour role-playing potential questions, some straightforward and some tricky. Bondi answered each one, noticing how her tone, pacing, and choice of words could influence perception. With each practice, she felt more confident, more prepared to face future public interactions. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, Bondi paused and looked around the room. She realized that public perception was only part of the equation. Equally important was her own internal state, her confidence, her calm, her clarity. Authority was not just about what others saw, it was about how firmly one believed in oneself. She reminded herself that moments of doubt were natural, but they did not define her. What defined her was her ability to respond, to act decisively, and to maintain composure under scrutiny. Later, she stepped outside for a brief walk. The city streets were busy, full of people going about their day, unaware of the small drama that had unfolded in the hall earlier. The bustle of the city reminded her of something important. Life went on, and no single moment, no matter how public or embarrassing, could stop it. People moved forward, adjusted, and adapted, and so could she. Bondi walked steadily, feeling the sun on her face and letting the natural rhythm of the streets calm her. During the walk, she thought about the people in the audience. Some had been skeptical, some curious, and some genuinely interested in what she had to say. Each reaction mattered, but she could not control every perception. What she could control was her own conduct, how she presented herself, how she communicated, and how she handled unexpected challenges. This awareness gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that true authority came not from never being embarrassed, but from mastering how to respond when such moments arose. Back in her office later, Bondi reviewed news coverage and social media commentary about the event. She noticed that while some reports mentioned the initial hesitation, many praised her composure and thoughtful responses. Some analysts even highlighted the moment as an example of resilience and leadership. Seeing this helped her internalize an important lesson. Mistakes or awkward moments often became opportunities to demonstrate strength and character. She made a mental note to remember this perspective whenever faced with public challenges in the future. By evening, Bondi began preparing for her next public engagement. She revisited the notes she had made earlier, refining her talking points and reinforcing key examples from her career. She practiced speaking aloud, paying attention to clarity, tone, and body language. Each repetition built confidence, each adjustment strengthened her readiness. She understood that authority was not static. It was maintained through consistent effort, preparation, and reflection. As the day came to a close, Bondi took a moment to reflect quietly. The initial embarrassment she had felt that morning had been real, but it had also been temporary. More important was how she had processed it, learned from it, and used it to strengthen her presence. She realized that vulnerability did not undermine authority. It could enhance it when paired with skill, composure, and honesty. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had turned a challenging experience into an opportunity for growth. Before leaving her office, she looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection showed someone calm, composed, and ready to face the world again. Bondi smiled faintly, acknowledging that public life would always include unexpected moments. What mattered was her ability to navigate them with integrity, intelligence, and poise. She walked out with a sense of renewed confidence, knowing that the next time she faced a challenging question or an awkward moment, she would handle it with the same determination and calm she had built today. The lessons of the day were clear. Preparation, Self-awareness and the ability to recover gracefully were key to maintaining authority. Bondi had not only handled an embarrassing moment, but had also strengthened her internal resilience. She understood that public perception was shaped by both words and actions, but more importantly, by the way one carried oneself under pressure. Authority, she realized, was earned not just through achievements, but through the quiet moments of recovery, reflection, and thoughtful response. As she left the building, the evening sky painted a soft glow over the city. Bondi took a deep breath and felt a sense of calm settle over her. The day had tested her in unexpected ways, but she had emerged stronger, more aware and more confident. She knew that challenges would come again, but now she was more prepared than ever to face them. She had reclaimed her sense of control, reinforced her inner authority, and transformed a fleeting moment of embarrassment into a lasting lesson in resilience and leadership. Walking to her car, she allowed herself a small private smile. She had proven something important, not to the audience, not to the reporters, but to herself. She could face difficult moments, think clearly under pressure, and emerge stronger on the other side. That sense of personal victory, subtle but powerful, was worth more than any applause or recognition. Bondi had reaffirmed her ability to remain composed, knowledgeable, and authoritative, even when caught off guard. By the time she drove home, her mind had shifted from reflection to quiet determination. She knew that the next public engagement would come, and with the lessons she had learned today, she would be ready. The day's experience had reinforced a truth she had always known, but now felt even more deeply. Real authority was not about avoiding embarrassment, mistakes, or challenges. It was about responding with grace, clarity, and confidence, and about showing that even when vulnerable, one could remain strong, composed, and true to oneself. The next morning, Pam Bondi woke early as she always did, with a sense of purpose. The previous day's events had lingered in her mind, but instead of anxiety, they now brought clarity. She had faced a moment of embarrassment, reflected on it, and developed strategies to respond better in the future. Today, she felt ready to reclaim her authority fully, to step back into the public eye with confidence, and to demonstrate why her experience mattered. She began her morning quietly, sipping coffee at her kitchen table while reviewing notes from the day before. Each note reminded her of key points, ways to explain past decisions clearly, examples of her work that highlighted her dedication, and phrases that reinforced accountability and leadership. She read them carefully, not just to memorize words, but to internalize the mindset they represented. Authority, she reminded herself, was as much about how one carried themselves as it was about what one said. By mid-morning, Bondi arrived at the venue for another engagement. It was smaller than the previous event, but equally important. She noticed familiar faces in the audience, some who had attended yesterday, others who were new. Cameras were set up again, microphones in place, and the room buzzed with a quiet energy. This time, however, Bondi felt grounded. She had prepared, reflected, and strengthened her focus. The earlier embarrassment was no longer a weight, but a reminder of her resilience. As she walked to the podium, she observed the audience with calm attentiveness. She smiled gently, nodded to a few people she recognized, and adjusted her notes. The host introduced her, listing her accomplishments and her experience, and the room responded with polite applause. Bondi returned the smile, took a deep breath, and began speaking. This time, there was a subtle difference in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that radiated from her posture, tone, and choice of words. She started by discussing topics she knew well, sharing stories from her career and lessons she had learned along the way. Her voice was steady, her words clear and relatable. She spoke not as someone trying to impress, but as someone genuinely sharing knowledge and perspective. The audience responded positively, leaning in, nodding, and taking notes. Bondi could feel the difference. The energy in the room was receptive rather than skeptical. She had reclaimed control of the space, not through force or bravado, but through calm presence and authenticity. Midway through her speech, a question came from the audience. It was similar in complexity to the one that had caused her brief embarrassment the day before, but this time Bondi reacted differently. She paused for only a brief moment, enough to show she was considering the question thoughtfully. Her earlier preparation gave her the clarity she needed. She addressed the question directly, explaining her reasoning in detail, acknowledging nuances, and citing examples from her past work. The audience listened intently. The pause that might have seemed awkward yesterday now felt deliberate, thoughtful, and composed. Cameras captured her steady gaze, measured gestures, and confident tone. The shift was subtle but significant. What had been a moment of potential vulnerability yesterday had transformed into an opportunity to demonstrate authority today. Bondi realized that true leadership often showed itself in how one responded to challenges, not in avoiding them. After answering the question, she continued her speech with even more engagement. She invited the audience to think critically, to ask questions, and to consider the broader implications of her work. She spoke about accountability, decision-making, and the balance between policy and practical outcomes. Each point was reinforced with examples that made her explanations tangible and credible. Her storytelling drew people in, making complex issues accessible and relatable. Bondi noticed subtle signs of approval from the audience: nods, smiles, and focused attention. She had managed to turn yesterday's embarrassment into today's demonstration of competence. People were not only listening, they were engaged. Some approached her afterward, thanking her for her clarity and honesty. These interactions reinforced her belief that authority was built on trust, transparency, and the willingness to face challenges openly. Behind the scenes, her team observed her performance with admiration. The transformation from yesterday's tentative moment to today's composed and authoritative presence was striking. Bondi's ability to adapt, reflect, and respond effectively highlighted qualities that went beyond formal titles or accomplishments. It was her poise under pressure, her thoughtfulness, and her genuine communication that commanded respect. After the event, Bondi took a moment alone in a quiet corridor. She reflected on the morning's engagement and recognized how much her mindset had influenced the outcome. The earlier embarrassment had been a catalyst for growth. It had prompted her to prepare more thoroughly, to refine her approach, and to strengthen her internal confidence. She realized that authority was not something one could display superficially. It required self-awareness, emotional control, and the ability to respond effectively under scrutiny. Her thoughts then turned to the people in the audience. Each individual had come with their own expectations, biases, and curiosity. Some were skeptical, some supportive, and some indifferent. Bondi understood that she could not control their perceptions entirely, but she could influence them through her conduct. By showing calmness, clarity, and competence, she could inspire trust and credibility. This understanding reinforced her approach: lead with authenticity, communicate with clarity, and respond with composure. Later, Bondi reviewed recordings of her speech and audience reactions. She noted areas of strength and areas that could be improved. Every gesture, inflection, and facial expression mattered. She observed how a well-placed pause or a concise explanation could shift audience perception significantly. This reflection was not about perfection. It was about refinement and growth. Bondi embraced the process, knowing that leadership required continuous attention to both content and presentation. In the afternoon, she met with her team to debrief and plan for future engagements. They discussed strategies for anticipating challenging questions, refining messaging, and maintaining composure in high-pressure situations. Bondi emphasized the importance of preparation, practice, and adaptability. Her approach was collaborative, encouraging input while guiding the team with experience and insight. Together, they developed practical strategies that would help her navigate similar situations with confidence in the future. During a quiet moment, Bondi allowed herself to reflect on her personal journey. She remembered the early days of her career, the long hours, the pressure, and the constant scrutiny. Each experience had taught her resilience, critical thinking, and the importance of maintaining composure. The embarrassment she had faced recently was just another lesson, reinforcing truths she had already learned. Authority was not about avoiding mistakes, but about handling them effectively when they occurred. As evening approached, Bondi prepared for a smaller, more informal gathering with community members. She saw this as another opportunity to demonstrate authenticity and connect with people directly. She approached the meeting with a relaxed, approachable demeanor, listening attentively and responding thoughtfully. Her ability to combine authority with approachability created a sense of trust and engagement. People felt heard, valued, and inspired by her insights. Throughout the day, Bondi noticed a pattern. Moments that could have been intimidating or embarrassing were instead opportunities to showcase her composure and knowledge. She realized that true authority was not static. It was dynamic, shaped by actions, words, and responses in real time. Each interaction, each decision, and each conversation contributed to a larger perception of competence and credibility. By embracing challenges rather than fearing them, she strengthened her presence and influence. By the end of the day, Bondi felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced questions, engaged with diverse audiences, and navigated potential challenges with clarity and poise. The earlier embarrassment, which had seemed significant at the time, now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by her growth and accomplishment. She understood that leadership was not about flawless execution, but about resilience, adaptability, and the ability to inspire confidence even in difficult circumstances. As she left the venue, she walked through the city streets reflecting on the day's lessons. The crowd's energy had faded, but the impact of her actions remained. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, strengthened by the knowledge that authority was earned through experience, preparation, and thoughtful response. Bondi smiled quietly, recognizing that her ability to face challenges head-on was a testament to her resilience and skill. Back at her office, she spent a few moments reviewing her plans for upcoming engagements. She refined talking points, reviewed potential questions, and considered strategies for handling unexpected situations. This preparation was not driven by fear, but by a desire to perform effectively and authentically. Bondi understood that the next challenge would come, but she now had the tools, mindset, and experience to face it with confidence and composure. Before leaving for the day, she looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection showed someone calm, composed, and authoritative. The next morning, Pam Bondi woke with a quiet sense of determination. She had spent the previous days reflecting, preparing, and practicing. She felt more centered than ever before. Today, she was scheduled to meet with a group of community leaders, policy experts, and reporters. The goal was not just to speak, but to demonstrate her competence, her knowledge, and her ability to handle challenging questions with clarity. She knew that this event could further solidify the authority she had been reclaiming. She began her day with her usual routine, a light breakfast, a few minutes of deep breathing, and a review of her notes. Each note was carefully crafted, not just facts and talking points, but examples that highlighted her understanding of complex issues. She reminded herself that competence was not only about having knowledge, but also about presenting it in a way that people could understand. Authority came from being credible, clear, and composed, especially when faced with difficult topics. Arriving at the venue, she noticed the audience already settling in. There was a mix of professionals, community representatives, and journalists. Some faces were familiar, others new. Cameras were positioned at various points, ready to capture every expression, gesture, and word. Bondi adjusted her jacket, took a deep breath, and walked to the podium. Her steps were confident, her posture straight, and her gaze steady. She felt prepared, not defensive, and that made all the difference. She began by acknowledging the importance of the gathering. She spoke about the challenges facing communities, the role of public service, and the value of ethical leadership. Her tone was calm and deliberate, her words simple yet precise. She did not try to impress with jargon or rhetoric. Instead, she focused on being clear, relatable, and authoritative. The audience responded with attentive silence, signaling that they were listening carefully to her every word. As the discussion moved forward, a reporter asked a question that was complex and slightly provocative. It required knowledge of legal policies, previous decisions, and the ability to explain nuances clearly. In the past, a question like this might have caused hesitation or unease. Today, however, Bondi responded immediately. She took a brief pause, just enough to show thoughtfulness, and then addressed the question point by point. She cited specific examples, referred to past experiences, and explained the reasoning behind her decisions. Her answers were detailed but accessible. She made sure to connect technical points to real-world implications, helping the audience understand why these issues mattered and how they affected ordinary people. Her calm tone, steady eye contact, and clear explanations made her points convincing. The question, which could have been a moment of tension, became a moment to display competence. The audience reacted positively. Nods, smiles, and engaged expressions replaced the initial curiosity and skepticism. Some took notes, others whispered briefly to neighbors, Impressed by the clarity of her answers, Bondi noticed the subtle shift in energy. What had started as a test of her knowledge had turned into a demonstration of her capability and authority. She realized that competence was not just about knowing facts. It was about communicating them effectively and inspiring confidence in those listening. As the session continued, Bondi invited more questions, encouraging dialogue rather than a one-way speech. She answered inquiries about policy, ethics, and community engagement with patience and insight. She acknowledged when certain questions required more nuance, offering to explore them in detail while maintaining her credibility. Her approach emphasized transparency and honesty, reinforcing the idea that authority was earned through both knowledge and integrity. Behind the scenes, her team watched with quiet admiration. Bondi's ability to remain composed, articulate, and approachable in real time was impressive. They noted how she turned potentially challenging questions into opportunities to educate and engage. Her gestures were purposeful but natural, her tone confident but not overbearing. This balance of authority and approachability created a presence that commanded respect without intimidation. During a brief pause, Bondi reflected on how far she had come in recent days. The embarrassment she had felt earlier had been a catalyst for growth. It had motivated her to prepare more thoroughly, refine her communication, and strengthen her internal confidence. She realized that mistakes or awkward moments were not weaknesses. They were opportunities to learn, adapt, and improve. Each challenge she faced added to her competence and credibility. One community leader asked a particularly challenging question, one that required a delicate balance of legal knowledge and empathy. Bondi took a moment, acknowledging the complexity of the issue, and then answered thoughtfully. She connected her response to both professional principles and human experiences, showing that her decisions were informed by both law and compassion. The audience responded with visible respect, some even applauding softly. Bondi felt a quiet satisfaction. She had turned a tricky moment into a demonstration of skill and insight. As the event progressed, Bondi shared stories from her career that illustrated key points. She talked about situations where she had faced criticism, tough decisions, and high-pressure moments. She explained how she had navigated these challenges, always emphasizing learning, accountability, and ethical responsibility. Her storytelling was engaging and relatable, making complex topics more understandable and showing the audience the depth of her experience. By the end of the session, the room was filled with an atmosphere of respect and engagement. People approached her afterward to express appreciation for her clarity, honesty, and thoughtful responses. Some wanted advice, others simply wanted to acknowledge her ability to handle challenging topics with grace. Bondi interacted with each person patiently, listening attentively and responding sincerely. Her competence was evident not only in her words but in her behavior, her attentiveness, and her ability to make people feel heard and valued. Later, Bondi reflected quietly on the day's experience. She understood that competence was more than knowledge. It was about preparation, communication, and emotional intelligence. It was about remaining calm under pressure, responding thoughtfully, and inspiring trust. She had not only demonstrated her knowledge but had also shown that she could lead with integrity and poise. Authority, she realized, was strengthened by action and reinforced through consistent behavior over time. As she prepared to leave, Bondi took a moment to speak with her team. They reviewed the event, noting areas of strength and minor points for future improvement. She emphasized the importance of continuous learning and preparation. Even though she had handled the event well, she knew that every experience was an opportunity to grow and refine her approach. Her mindset was clear. Authority and competence were ongoing efforts, not fixed traits. Walking to her car, Bondi reflected on the subtle changes in the way people perceived her. She noticed that what had once been skepticism or curiosity had shifted to respect and attentiveness. Her ability to respond to challenging questions, explain complex issues clearly, and remain composed had left a lasting impression. She understood that public perception was shaped not only by what was said, but by how it was said, and how one carried oneself under scrutiny. That evening, Bondi spent time reviewing notes and preparing for upcoming engagements. She considered potential questions, topics of discussion, and scenarios that might arise. Her preparation was not driven by fear but by a commitment to perform effectively and authentically. She knew that the next challenge would come and she wanted to be ready. Competence, she reminded herself, was maintained through careful planning, reflection, and consistent practice. Before heading to bed, Bondi allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She thought about the journey she had experienced over the past few days, the initial embarrassment, the reflection, the preparation, and the demonstration of competence. Each step had reinforced her understanding that authority and credibility were earned through actions, decisions, and thoughtful responses. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that she had faced challenges and emerged stronger, more capable, and more respected. Bondi realized that her journey was far from over. Each public engagement, each question, and each challenge was an opportunity to learn, adapt, and strengthen her presence. She understood that competence was not about being perfect or knowing everything, but about being prepared, thoughtful, and composed. By demonstrating knowledge, integrity, and calmness, she had turned moments of potential weakness into moments of strength. As she lay in bed that night, Bondi reflected on the broader lesson she had internalized. True authority was not defined by the absence of mistakes or embarrassment, but by the ability to face challenges head-on, respond thoughtfully, and maintain composure under pressure. It was earned through preparation, reflection, and consistent demonstration of skill and integrity. The journey from embarrassment to competence had shown her the power of resilience, focus, and deliberate action. By the end of the night, Bondi felt ready for whatever the future would bring. She had proven to herself that she could handle difficult situations, communicate clearly, and inspire confidence. The day had reinforced that competence was not only about knowledge, but also about the way one applied it, the way one engaged with others, and the way one maintained